Hello, welcome back, or welcome to the World Sustainable Procurement Day. If you are just joining us, you've missed about 19 hours of great content, insight, and tools. So we are deep into World Sustainable Procurement Day, but we have an absolutely stunning panel here now. And these are probably some of my favourite SPP ambassadors. And I have to say, one of the best chapters within the Sustainable Procurement Pledge. We have chapters for industries and countries and topics. The SPP Pharma team are without doubt one of my favourite chapters and doing some of the best stuff. So no excuses to not have another great session today. So I'm going to be your moderator today, but we've got a fantastic agenda ahead. We want to hear where you're calling from, so put your names into the chat, but also make sure to put your questions into the Q&A box. We want to be hearing your thoughts for this lot here as well. They've got plenty to share with you, but I'm sure you've got plenty to share as well. So the agenda today, we're going to be talking about decarbonisation in the pharmaceutical supply chain. So we're going to be hearing from after we've done a quick poll and I've done a bit of intro to the panel, we're going to be hearing from Zelia about pharma decarbonisation overall. We're going to be hearing about decarbonisation accelerated tools from Alyssa. We're going to be touching on renewable electricity from Torsten and Bayer, getting into that supply decarbonisation glide path with Fred, and then we'll be taking more of your questions. So who are the panel? Let's have a look at them. So what a beautiful bunch they are, and me, of course. So we have Zelia Kranich, who is the SPP Pharma co-chair and works for Perrigo in her day job, ably assisted by Fred Turco, the other SPP Pharma co-chair, and is VP at Procurement, Sustainable Procurement at Pfizer. We have Torsten Held from Bayer, and we have Alyssa Cadell from Thermo Fisher Scientific, who's also an SPP champion. This is an elite group, and you're about to get an elite presentation, I promise. No pressure team at all. So before we get started, I think we've got a little poll. So we're going to play a little poll now. So we want you guys to get stuck in. I want to see all of you participating. I can see you all, by the way. I can see all, however many hundred of you are, we can see you all. So let us know what you think your level of maturity is in your decarbonisation strategy. So, are you just beginning? Have you got some basic understanding of your decarbonisation strategy? I'm considered an organisational decarbonisation expert. That is a bold claim. What a wonderful poll this is. So, fill us in. Tell us what you think. Don't be shy. Don't be humble. If you feel like you're an expert, let us know. If you feel like you're right at the start, don't be shy to tell us. Okay. Do we feel like we've got enough votes? When you're ready, team, I'll let you decide. Can we have a look at the results? Can we have a look at the results? Can we have a look at the results? Can we have a look at them? I don't know. I guess, can you see them? I can't. Let's have a look. Are we running it again? Here we go. Here we go. So it looks like most people just at the beginning of their journey. That's what we expect. That's what we like to see. A good bit of honesty there. A few people, almost a quarter basic understanding. Who are those 4 people think they're industry decarbonisation experts? We want to know who you are. Maybe put your names in the chat. But I think, team, we have a generally early stage maturity. Although I would say on decarbonisation, everyone's a beginner, really. I think we're all kind of making up as we go along. So it's great to see that we've got a lot to learn in this session. So that'll be a good place to start. So I think without further ado, let me hand over to the legend that is Zelia Kranich. Over to you, Zelia.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Good to be working with SPP again and having this presentation today. And so we're going to start talking about what Pharma has been up to. I have to say, I think with all the sessions today, what we've learned about Pharma is we are really good at collaborating. And so you're going to hear a little bit about our collaboration, you're going to hear about our tools, and a little bit about where we are and what we're moving towards. So why does Pharma care about net zero? Why are we doing all this? Well, it's the right thing to do. We all know that. We know the stewardship piece. But when you look at all the regulations that are coming down the pike, they're all around sustainability. They're all around ESG. When I started my career 20, 30 years ago, I used to say, hey, you know, we work on sustainability to go above and beyond compliance. That's no longer the case. This is not above and beyond compliance. This is compliance. When you look at the regulations like the Green Deal or the German Supply Chain Act, it's really confusing to organizations how to comply with all these things. But it puts sustainability front and center. And so it's no longer about reducing our risk in the future. It's about managing our risk today. Also, some sustainable products can be the most innovative products. Innovation is a tough thing to come by these days. We all are trying to get products out the door. There aren't necessarily new ideas. And sustainability brings forth efficiency. It brings forth new concepts. It's the master of innovation. It's really such a great start and a great way to lead your company into working on more sustainable items and newer, better, greater things. Also, there's still opportunities to reduce costs, and our customers care about these things. I can't tell you how many customer requests I get. I think I had about 40 in January alone. And so we get requests like EcoVadis, CDP, the Science Based Target Initiative. These are things that our customers are looking for us to respond to, and these responses are becoming more and more challenging. And it just shows that everybody cares about this, and sustainability has become front and center. It's no longer the thing that you do behind the scenes. It's something that matters to our stakeholders and to our customers. So where is pharma today? So pharma has some really ambitious goals. We're signed up to science-based targets. There's 82 pharma, and this is a few months old, so I would guess that that number is even incorrect already. So quite a few pharma are signed up. Our goals are more ambitious, our scope 1 and 2 in particular, than most other companies or most other sectors out there. And big pharma is a big emitter, so this is appropriate. So McKinsey put together this slide here, and you can see we're talking. We're not just talking the talk. We're doing this. We're being role models for our suppliers. So if you look, we all have really ambitious scope 1 and 2, and more ambitious than what our scope 3 are. But then our scope 3, we're really looking for our suppliers and to have an overall program moving towards net zero and carbon neutral. And you can see that across the board here. Almost every pharma company has that, where our overall ambition is to get to net zero or carbon neutral. So this is not for the weak. This is a very big undertaking and something that we all have to collaborate and work together to do. And training and working with others. This isn't the place to be, have your own strategy by yourself. We all need to collaborate, work together, and move forward in the same direction. And so that's what this slide shows here. We are all moving forward in the same direction. And now for Alyssa.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your day or continuing your day here with the World Sustainable Procurement Day. And as Delia noted, we've got some really ambitious targets in the pharma supply chain. And in order to achieve those, there is no shortage of tools, guidelines, trainings to help us all get there. So for those of you that denoted that you are more at the beginning of your maturity journey, or that you've done some initiatives, but perhaps are seeking to understand how those measure up against the expectations of the pharma industry, this is really one of the objectives of what the SPP Pharma chapter is here to do, is to help you navigate through what you can see as a very green landscape of guidelines and trainings and offerings and certifications. And I think the good news here is that not all of these certifications or programs apply to every industry. There are really some great industry-specific guidelines, and especially in the pharma industry, there are some consistent expectations that a lot of our top-tier pharma customers are asking for. And for those of you that are saying, wow, it's really hard for me to keep up with what my customers want in pharma, here at Thermo Fisher, we understand. We are supplying all these pharma companies as well, so we're happy to be on this journey together with all of you who may be seeking to understand this landscape. So please join us in the Pharma chapter as we continue to have recurring meetings throughout the year to kind of go into depth on more of these opportunities. But today we wanted to call out just a couple of things. So if we go to the next slide. I know that Oliver already dropped some information in the chat, but one really important organization to know about, if you're not familiar, is the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. And I wanted to share that they've recently published a new tool called a Decarbonization Pathway, which is really a maturity model. So we can use these in the Pharma chapter in two ways. If you are a Pharma customer, you can look at your suppliers and understand how they're performing against this maturity model. And if you're a supplier into a Pharma customer, you can look at your own performance and say, how do I stack up and how might I differentiate myself by improving or maturing my decarbonization programs at my company. So I think this is a really important tool. You can take this away with you today, especially if you're in one of those newer maturity brackets. And I know there's been some recent sessions lately specific from PSCI, including presentations from some of our friends at AstraZeneca. So if you need additional details about this model, I'm sure you can find them in the SPP content on the website. Another example of pharma industry working together in a different tool and resource, or for those of you that are very interested in more deeply understanding the API supply chain and the API decarbonization pathway, there's a joint collaboration program called the Activate program. There are 5 founding members, as you can see here, and this group is really going to focus in 2023 on more deeply exploring some of the hotspot high carbon areas as it relates to API manufacturing. So if that's of interest to you, you can learn more as well in future sessions. And then lastly, this is a program that if you're in or around or adjacent to the pharma community, I'm sure you've heard of, but if you're newer to this space, Energize is a collaboration program. I think we're now up over 20 member companies or close to 20 member companies. And they've come together with the support of Schneider Electric to offer a tool to help supplier partners in the pharma industry learn, get educated, and eventually get access to renewable energy. We realize that renewable energy is a really big component of unlocking decarbonization through all the tiers of our supply chain, and that not all of our supplier partners may be prepared to access renewable energy on their own. So if you participate in the pharma supply chain, you may have already been invited to this program. If you're interested in learning more about it, or wondering if you should join, it's a great free resource for the supplier community. So if there's additional questions on that, we can take them at the end of today or provide additional materials outside of this call. But suffice to say, many more tools to come. So please join us in our chapter as we continue through 2023, and you can really help us shape the rest of the year's agenda.
So now I'm on board, and welcome to the audience. I have the honor today to talk a little bit about Bayer's renewable electricity strategy. And everything starts in general with the journey to define your sustainability targets. Fred, go to the next slide, please. So as you can see, Bayer has committed to a science-based target initiative, and therefore we have set our target to reduce our carbon footprint by 30 within 2029 by 42%. From this reduction, 30% are coming out of 100% renewable electricity purchase. And that is my work in the company, the transition of our electricity purchasing. So to do that, the first topic was to define a quality criteria for renewable electricity, and that is defined on the next slide. And there you can see we had a lot of effort to align our quality criteria with NGOs to be sure that nobody is claiming us as a greenwashing company. So we did a lot of effort and aligned, especially with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, our criteria. and we have defined to have a minimum share of renewable electricity with grid connection of 50%, coming from investments younger than 15 years, of 50%, also a big share of 33% from assets which are younger than 6 years by closing the contract, to really make sure that we are supporting the additional building from renewable sources. Also, we aligned to have minimum 70% out of wind and photovoltaic, and to reduce our share of hydropower to maximum 20%, to be sure that we have no negative environmental impact in our portfolio. All these criteria you can also find on our homepage, and I think we are one of the we are the only company who has published our quality criteria for renewable electricity on our website. Saying that, then you have to make sure that you get the highest sustainability grade for your renewable electricity, but also we would be bad procurement guys if we were not also striking for the biggest saving potential. So, and therefore we developed the ranking, and you can see on the graph there are 3 different tools which are coming with the highest saving potential and also with the highest sustainability grades, and 3 other tools which are the most common and the most easiest ones. But you have to look really deep in that solutions to make sure that you have not a reputation risk, because the quality of the renewable solution is too low. And also you have to make sure that you are able to gain savings, to reduce your OPEX in your productions, and to reduce your COGS. And therefore, the most sustainable solution and the solution with the highest savings impact is always on-site renewable self-generation. But as you probably also own on your know on your own body, most of the companies are not willing to invest capex in infrastructure measures. So therefore, we are striking within Bayer, especially for the tools number 2 and number 3, and that is the solution of physical PPAs, either on-site or off-site. PPAs are definitely high sustainable, especially if they are physical, and they have the option to reduce your costs and to gain savings, but they are also very complex. The most simple solution will definitely be the simple attribute purchase like RECs or GROs, but as already mentioned, there is sometimes a reputational risk if you're, for example, purchasing GROs out of Norway or Sweden for Germany, and you have no big physical connection within that. If you do that country by country with physical connection, physical grid connection, everything is fine. Also, procuring a retailer green tariff is mostly a simple solution, but mostly also coming with additional costs, so not really highly welcome within procurement organization. And you have also to make a deep dive, what is the quality within the green tariff. Virtual renewable offsite PPAs or REC purchase agreements can be sustainable, are able to come with savings, but also here you can probably gain, or not probably, you can perhaps gain a reputation risk if you are not using locations for the renewable energy production which are physically connected to your site, to your usage. Please go. Yeah. So with all the tools you have general challenges. So especially in a regulated market or in a monopoly market, you have only limited opportunities for implementation of physical supply of renewable electricity. Mostly the only chance is only to have self-generation on site, but as mentioned before, capex is rare in the companies, and therefore not the best or the most likely solution. Within the energy regulatory and all the embedded obligations, it can also be difficult to implement a PPA on site. So therefore, you have to look for other alternatives, or you have to have long negotiations with the local utilities, the monopoly in that area. Also, the fit of corporate PPAs in the site structure and the site-specific energy usage is not always easy, and you will see that at many sites you have too small electricity demand to fill it into a corporate PPA. So you have to rely on in a combination of green tariff and physical supply within that green tariff or in a standard supply contract to fulfill your requirements. For all PPAs, you have also finance and accounting obligations. So in general, you have an embedded derivative accounting for PPAs, for physical as well as for financial PPAs, if you are breaking the own use exemption and you are selling portions of electricity back to the market. So no easy topic. You have to do a lot of convincing work within the company. You have to align with legal, with all the other internal departments to get a foot into the door and to be able to sign a long-term contract for renewable electricity supply. Saying that, you always heard the role of procurement has definitely changed. From a simple service provider in the past, bring us the electron to the site, secure us the supply, and everything is fine. You are now a project manager. You have to connect to regulatory authorities externally, to auditors to get also the certification approved that it counts as renewable electricity. You have to connect with asset developers, consultants, energy suppliers, NGOs, peers, and industrial groups to get all the knowledge from the external market. And then you have also to connect internally in the direction of your internal departments, as mentioned, accounting, finance, treasury, legal, all the engineering departments, real estate to do something on site, and also to the board of management to make a convincing job into that direction, to get all the different solutions involved, implemented, and to secure the transition to a renewable electricity supply. That's from my side, and I'm now handing over to Fred to give you next input to other topics.
Thank you, Torsten. And folks, apologies as I work through the technology. It's not my forte, but really compelling from Torsten, the information provided today. And it shows the transformation procurement from consultant into project manager, but I would say project leader, right, within the organization. These are weighty decisions, very, as Zelia said, and then Alyssa talked about some of the complexity, and then Torsten further elaborated. It's a challenge, but also a significant opportunity for procurement as a function to really step up its value proposition. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a similar transformation, not on the scope 1, 2, and then, but more on the scope 3. So Pfizer last year, we committed to go from carbon neutral, our previous 2020 goal and ambition, which was a step change for us, to net zero, which is another significant step change. I'm not going to get into the details of the nuances, but specifically it set absolute targets for scope 1, 2, which is our direct facilities and fleet emissions, and then everything else, scope 3. And it set that absolute target for us to drive to that to 2040. The challenge is scope 3 includes suppliers, and ultimately that's 57% of Pfizer's total scope of carbon, or in our carbon or decarbonization glide path, 57% of that to get to 90%. We have 45,000 suppliers across over 100 countries around the globe. And as you can imagine, and many of you know, our scope 1 and 2 challenge is equally the suppliers' scope 1 and 2 challenge, right? There's a technology curve, there's an understanding, there's an expertise, and ultimately a pivot for procurement in particular to play a lead role in driving that change in collaboration with many other parts of the organization. So going back to the supplier side, 57%, with that challenge, ultimately success looks like suppliers that we partner with that mirror our ambition. But how do we get there? Which is the next slide. So for us, we're taking a segmented approach. We're doing what procurement does well. So we're first defining the challenge and the baseline, and also pivoting that into an opportunity to work with and be part of our net zero governance organization. So our baseline for suppliers is 4.1 million metric tons of CO2, about a 5x our scope 1 and scope 2, which is typical for most organizations. When we look at that, is how do we then take a look at our 45,000 suppliers and start to segment them into the ability to work with them and partner. In short, take the elephant and bite it off in chunks rather than trying to take the elephant whole. So we have a very simple model that we've further adapting as we go forward is understanding segmentation, and then with suppliers, influence, integration in terms of our decision criteria, collaboration, and then ultimately getting into, and we're very transparent about this, increased differentiation, meaning it's a key part of our decision criteria for supplier selection 25 forward. So break these down in pieces. So on the influence side, we are working with information to define the what. It's our net zero targets, so we're consistent. As defined by SBTI, we work with that as a consistent industry, not just pharma, standard or science-based target initiative as a third-party standard. So that helps us define the what. Science aligned, similar to Torsten's goals, right, of minus 1.5 degrees C, but that's our what. And then we are working very acutely on enable the how. Right? So we're not going to be able to do all the how with 45,000 suppliers, right? But that's from one to many to work with that. We integrate net zero criteria into our processes. This year, we have any competitive bid over $1 million. We have net zero criteria that's up to 20% of our decision criteria, between 10 and 20%. It's driving that discussion. And that's the majority of our competitive bids relative to spend. And then in parallel to all of these activities, and we integrate into our contracting and other things, but in parallel, as Alyssa said, there's a lot of collaboration where it goes from one to many suppliers, Pfizer to many in our ecosystem or supply chain, to many to many. We want to be talking in the same thing. This is a industry and societal challenge. So how do we work many to many? And that's collaborate. There's the Energize program, which is to accelerate the journey for largely medium and smaller tier suppliers, right? For adopt training, understanding, and ultimately give them a consortium buy. There's the Activate program, which is specific to API oriented suppliers, which is a larger kind of part of our footprint. And then there is the PSCI and many other initiatives to say, okay, how does the industry form, storm, and norm into getting into high perform? We are not in the high performing across industry, although I think pharma is pretty good, right? But we are collaborating across that so the suppliers see very much the same messages and the same enabling tools. So it goes from one to many to many to many. And then when we talk about differentiation, we could do some of that now, but we think the pivot point for us is when we meet our short-term goal of 64% decarbonization across our supply chain of 45,000 suppliers by 2025. It's an aggressive goal. It's a challenge and an opportunity. It drives a conversation across our organization as senior levels of decision makers because it's a big goal. And once we commit to a goal, we have our organization then behind us. We want to start the conversation of carrot and stick, and differentiation is definitely more of the stick, where we are looking to partner with suppliers that align with our ambition, mirror that ambition, and help us drive that decarbonization journey going forward. And we will do what we do best is we will segment. Some parts of our supply chain are more mature than others, and some segments of that supply chain are more mature than others. Tier 1 consulting, to pick on the McKinsey's, EY's, PwC's of the world, for instance, we can segment them now. They're largely there. And we could differentiate our decision criteria there without significant business impact. Other parts of our organization will be more difficult. We have to do more of the upfront enabling to differentiate, to make sure that we continue this evolution, not revolution journey to meet our 2040 goal of 90% reduction. So this is just a snapshot, but in short, I think what this is talking about is similar to Torsten, where we're going from consultant process owner to being part of business solution maker for the organization. We are part of our net zero governance, which is part of our environmental social governance committee. And we have an active voice within the organization because how significant the supplier content is for our decarbonization journey. And with that, I will turn back over to Ollie.
Superb work, guys. Absolutely excellent. As I said, I think without doubt the pharmaceutical industry is leading on collaboration. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've heard it with my own ears. And even in the Scope 3 maturity benchmark we've been running, the pharmaceutical companies that completed have scored highest on industry collaboration compared to any of their peers in other industries. So it definitely shows that pharmaceutical collaboration isn't just working, it's actually being more effective than ever. And I think great evidence here. This team have worked very hard on putting that together, and it shows. It was excellent. So we have got some time for some questions, and I think we should maybe riff a little bit, guys, as well. We've got plenty to discuss here, but perhaps we can start with the question from Bill, actually. I know, Alyssa, maybe you can pick this one up. And, we've got to talk about things like Scope 3 data. It has to be done. But how do you avoid double counting of Scope 3 emissions up and down the supply chain?
Sure. So I want to make sure that it's clear across the community that across two companies' Scope 3 emissions, for instance, Fred's and myself, there is inherent double counting. And by design within the GHG protocol, a company like Thermo Fisher, our Scope 3 emissions inventory is made up of many other companies' Scope 1 and 2 emissions inventories. So there's nothing inherently incorrect about the nature of that double counting. And it's really, the GHG protocol really implemented that process to make sure that companies made mention that where they have a business influence through the activities that they do outside of their own operations, they can influence change. So there is never an intent inside the GHG protocol, for instance, to sum up all the world's Scope 3 inventories. That's not the intent of the tool. It's really instead for a business to understand what drives material greenhouse gas emissions across all of the ways they interact with the world so that they can make smart business choices about where to engage and reduce. So I hope that that's helpful in the sense of I would not worry about double counting. It is kind of by design inside the GHG protocol.
Yeah, and maybe if I could just add, I think that's a really fair point, Alyssa. We had a lot of debate internally, and ultimately, we're not letting perfect get in the way of good. We're directionally correct, in particular our Scope 3, right? We have better data in some parts of Scope 3. The suppliers, we're doing a consistent, and I think that's the key, estimate for emissions while we transition in parallel to establishing absolutes, right, and prorated absolutes. But overall, I think most people are in that. What I would say is don't let perfect get in the way of good. You have to make progress while you're standing up that functionality to get more precise.
That's good. One question that gets asked a lot, I think, particularly given that the pharmaceutical chapter, I think, is one of the chapters in the SPP that will be, I think, sharing cross-industry quite a bit, is what are some of the challenges that the pharmaceutical industry face and procurement people in the pharmaceutical industry face that perhaps are a bit unique to pharma? Has anybody got any thoughts on that? Zelia?
Yeah, I think there's a very strong regulatory piece that makes it very difficult for us to change our products, move quickly. We tend to be slower moving organizations, and we have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to change. And that's a big challenge when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a 3-year life, a tech transfer, right, on the regulated GMP, GLP space. That's definitely a consideration, which is why I think it has to be a thoughtful process and perspective, from the entire supply chain, but certainly in terms of the overall manufacturing of goods.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we're seeing some really good signs of the chemicals industry and the pharmaceutical industry collaborating. It's good to see that the product carbon footprinting guidelines from Together Sustainability, and the pharmaceutical industry is starting to look at that now. I know obviously that's been led by your colleagues Torsten at Bayer as well, but there's definitely opportunities for the pharmaceutical industry to both share and learn from other sectors, I feel. Okay, excellent. Caitlin, great question. Fred, she loved that you were talking about segmentation. So what's your advice for companies that aren't good at segmenting? How do you break that down if you're not very good at that?
Yeah, I mean, spend management, it could be a science unto itself, right? How do you get into your ERP or your base kind of data set, which is mostly financial derivative, and then what's out of scope, right? We've spent a lot of time, to be candid. I'll just, there's no silver bullet or magic. We spent a lot of time with our finance colleagues, procurement colleagues, and then ultimately our global environmental health and safety colleagues to align on what is included, what's not included, right? Greenhouse gas protocol, science-based target initiative, we have definitions, but I think there's no quick and easy shortcut. I think you don't have to do segmentation, but having a baseline for performance improvement is the key, however you get there, right? And there's a bunch of different models, because ultimately that gives you your starting point for your glide path, right? And then glide path is strategy, which is a fancy word for plan, right? And just means that you're going to allocate a certain amount of resource to look to drive to that. Are you doing what you intended to do, and are you driving the results that you're intending? And if not, how do you kind of moderate? Segmentation for us help because there's a correlation to spend with overall carbon impact, right? It's not for one, but it's a good correlation where we can then invest with our what we'd call more strategic tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, right? Which is about 200 that dictate about 65% of our spend. Out of 45,000, that's our initial segment. And then we move out to the next segment and the next segment, and allows this focus, I think, for the organization. Now, if you're not good at segmentation, I think there's a 1 step back, 2 steps forward to say, okay, how do we get to that information on impact, which is ultimately what we're doing? And how do you then focus, right? Because ultimately it could be really daunting otherwise. The last thing I would leave with, not to drain this, but Simon Sinek was probably one of the better corporate motivational speakers, not to plug something else, but talks about the law of diffusion, right? If you're going to launch an iPhone, for instance, with a new, or whatever phone with the new whiz bangs, right? You focus on your early adopters. You focus on the folks that already believe in that to drive the change for the rest. So how do you understand via survey or other folks that philosophically align, right? To move the middle of the bell curve, right? Through some sort of segmentation, survey, spend data, other, to get to that population to drive the discussion for the rest of your supply chain. I welcome thoughts from others, but to me, there's many ways of going about it, but ultimately you got to get to that focus.
Yeah, really good advice. I think also, I think I'm reminded of one of your peers who, when they looked at Scope 3, purely a spend data analysis, obviously the amount of money that pharmaceuticals companies spend on consulting, they realized that they should perhaps tackle consulting, the emissions from consulting. Now, no matter how you might raise an eyebrow at that, the realities were, of course, that exercise of that pharmaceutical company collaborating more with their consultants actually engaged the CFO of that pharmaceutical company, and they were able to engage them with more carbon savings. So there's not always an obvious route to these savings, but also sometimes those small wins can actually unlock bigger things as well. So it's not always as simple as that. But that was a really good thought. A great question from Vincent. So I'm gonna ask that as well. Now, the pharmaceutical industry does tend to sometimes suffer from that sort of tiering and that stratosphere of big pharma and smaller pharma, and perhaps big pharma can move faster and so on, and everything else. So if you're not in a big pharma company, what levers can you use to kind of engage suppliers and get them on decarbonisation? So it's a very, very good question. Anyone want to pick that up? Maybe Alyssa, maybe you can reflect on that a little bit as well.
I'll start from a perspective of a supplier, and then maybe Cecilia can take over and share her view from the other side. But I would say, if you're, as a supplier, we have big pharma and small pharma customers coming. And if you have a good understanding of what the big pharma is asking for, what you'll find is a lot of the leaders in big pharma have really good science-aligned, science-based targets. They're kind of aligned to best in class. If you're able to convince your leadership to set similar targets, then the ask that you're going to make to your supplier is the same as the supplier is receiving from many other customers, which makes it much more compelling for them, whether it's, answer this questionnaire, report your emissions, sign up to projects, decarbonize under this particular time frame, set your own science-based targets. If you are making the same ask as other customers are making, it's much easier for a supplier to commit to helping you on that journey. It's that power of the many. And it's much easier for us to respond quickly to your needs if the thing that you're asking for is very aligned to the things our largest customers are asking for. So I'm not saying that you can't have your own strategy or that you shouldn't be informed about how your strategy matters to your company, but I would say if you look to those larger company peers who are doing it really well, you can learn a lot about the asks that they're making, and you may in fact be able to kind of hook into that their buying power, and if you don't have your own leverage, you can still achieve the objectives that you want.
Yeah.
Celia, I don't know if you agree with that concept, but
yeah, those are great points, Alyssa. And I think just to add to that a little bit, we tend to not have a lot of resources towards sustainability, and so you really have to focus. So I think it is about figuring out where can you get the most bang for your buck, what's really important to your organization, and looking at things at a category level. So within procurement, there's a number of different categories that we all work on. And I'll tell you, at Parago, we have a very strong focus on packaging and palm oil. And that may not be what other organizations are focusing on, but for us, that's what our customers are looking for. Our customers have driven us to do that, and we're listening. And we also know that there's a huge greenhouse gas impact for our organization with those categories. And we continue to look for some of those big wins, and we're starting to move on to some additional categories. But I think it's about truly understanding where your spend is, where your greenhouse gas impact is, and not necessarily worrying about that tail end, looking at those suppliers that are going to be really impactful within those categories that are really impactful.
Really good advice. Really good advice. Again, I think I want to come back to you, Alyssa, as well. I think the voice of the supplier here is absolutely key. And I appreciate you might want to be candid about this, but have you seen a decent improvement from your pharma clients and customers in this industry in terms of how they're engaging you? Are they collaborating well? Are they making your life easier? Are they listening to you? Because it feels like the likes of yourselves have got the real opportunity to innovate and almost engage upwards and almost teach them a thing or two about what they should be doing to decarbonize. Would that be fair?
I think in general, we're all learning from each other. As you mentioned, Oliver, this is still, even the experts are still new in the world of business, right? When it comes to Scope 3, and we're learning from one another. I think that the nice thing with some of our key customers that are most engaged with us on this topic is everyone's willingness to share, everyone's willingness for transparency. It makes it really valuable, and when we're able to get transparent information from our customers about what they're really asking for and what they're really trying to get at, we're able to best service their actual need and solution for them. So I think we're seeing a really good two-way discussion, and starting to do the same with our suppliers as well, which is going to be really important because we have a very large supply chain ourselves, which is contributing to our overall footprint, which is contributing to our customers' overall footprint, to go back to that double counting thing. So continuing to engage, continuing to listen. I think it's one of the things that we're trying to do in our supplier community is really seek to understand what suppliers are already on the path, just break down any barriers they have, but let them run. If they're aligned to our expectations around having a science-based trajectory for decarbonization, we don't want to stand in their way, right? We'd rather take our time and our resource to educate and influence those that are yet to get on the path, so we can just grow the community overall.
I've got a question I feel like I want to ask about cascading requests and getting down to those lower tiers. And I think particularly when you've got a good pharmaceutical collaboration and you've got good engagement at your tier as well, Alyssa, it feels like the challenge of cascading decarbonisation and scope 3 requests is one that stands a good chance of succeeding in pharma. I wonder if any of you've got any thoughts about how we start cascading down multi-levels. Maybe Zelia or Fred or Torsten even.
Yeah, I think that does come back to training, doesn't it? I mean, the real way to get the word out is having sessions like this. We're probably talking to our tier 2s and our tier 3s right now. But, to be able to have different kind of training mechanisms and be able to use like the decarbonization where the model that PSCI has, where we're able to rank our suppliers, I think those are all great tools that we can easily pass along. And the more sessions we do like this, the more training we put together, the more those sessions can get out there, those recordings can get out there, and we can get the word out. That's why I always volunteer for these. I think this is one of the most important parts of my job and the easiest way for us to have a huge impact.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the challenges of cascading is that typically when you're cascading messages about sustainability, you've got procurement talks to account manager runs around trying to find a sustainability person that knows what they're talking about, and then that sustainability person tries to talk to their own procurement team about that. By getting all of the procurement professionals in the pharma value chain together, potentially through the chapter, does that enable us to skip those probably broken lines of communication and get pharma working together? I wonder if that's a possible hope and dream for the pharma chapter.
Well, I think, Ollie, just on that two-way communication before this call, folks missed Alyssa kidding me a little bit that Pfizer sent out a survey and a request, and she got multiple, I think up to 10 different requests from her colleagues asking for key information to fill out our survey. So I do think a little bit more of that coordination. I think of it as the snowflake effect, right? To be effective, you need multiple points of entry. You got to build up that kind of level so it really sinks in. And then you kind of can foster that efficiency and effectiveness, right? Right now, it's a little bit crude, right? But I do think it's a snowflake effect. I think it's starting to take place through multiple channels of communication. The last thing I would say is when we look at this, there's not just one way. We're trying to get two-way communication with our suppliers, right? We're defining the what, but we're trying to enable the how. One of those things in our maturity model, like PSCI, is that we give them credit for their senior level folks committing to our engagement. So we want to give them credit in an RFP. We want to give them credit in supplier relationship. We're not doing it for us, to be really candid. It doesn't give us credit in our goal and our reporting for ESG. We're doing it so they can actually get resources on their side, the supplier side, right? They can drive that resource to accelerate their journey. So we want to give them credit through. So I think there's multiple layers of how you work with a carrot, but I think most of it right now is carrot, right? How do we incentivize, promote, and really start to get this to take hold through the snowflake effect?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to add to that, I think Ollie, you had mentioned that there's wrong people getting together, or we're trying to go through account managers, and that just goes to show that there's not a tool or an easy way of doing this, right? It is about engagement. It's about having those discussions. It's about truly understanding your suppliers and working closely with them. So we all like to track data, and it's great that we all have surveys that we send out to our suppliers, but it's truly important for us to have those relationships and for us to basically get out there and have those discussions.
Yeah. When Bonnie Nixon asks us a question, trust me, you need to ask it. She is a legend of sustainable procurement, so I have to ask it. Would like to hear about how you're all dealing with challenges of scaling, particularly when using a due diligence approach. So any thoughts on that?
It's a challenge. Let's be transparent. This is the reality. I mean, if there was a silver bullet, I would have used the hour to tell you all about it. I think that's what Fred and I, we all have, Torsten, Fred, myself for sure, we all have tens of thousands of suppliers in our supply chain. And as you look across those emissions, certainly we can segment and certainly we can focus and prioritize. But at the end of the day, if we're talking about a true net zero, 90% reduction by 2050 future, we're not engaging 100 suppliers, right? And I don't think we have the answer in the way that I don't think many procurement organizations know how to effectively engage on any topic with the majority of their tail spend. So, you know, a lot of this will come from educating procurement folks. So it's not the supplier responsibility person or the corporate sustainability person that engages with the supplier, but every single category manager understands that expectation. That'll be a component. You know, I expect technology to continue to move with us, but there's no, I think it's fair from my perspective anyway to say, you know, Bonnie, shoot a comment if you got the right answer.
Yeah.
But this is the $1 million, $1 billion, $1 trillion question, trillion a metric ton question, probably.
And Bonnie, just to add to that, I think it's a great question. For us, we're kind of scaling internally. To Alyssa's point, right? How do we go from a core team of, I'd say, more subject matter experts, or understand the program, to kind of really empower the rest of the organization? So this year we put in targets into our procurement colleagues' goals. We have 6 goals. One of them is net zero supplier engagement, right? And that's all, you know, I'm not going to name the number, but all of our sourcing folks that are driving those sourcing initiatives and others, and they don't have to be the subject matter expert. They just have to drive the conversation, drive the value, drive the engagement. And then where it percolates up, there is some feedback from the supplier where they need an expert. We get them to the right person. So that's kind of the internal one-to-many. And now we're working with other operations teams, external supply, our pharmaceutical science team, and others where they can do the same. We're using the same vernacular. It's not rocket science, it's a maturity model, but how do we drive improvement continuously? So that's internal. I think you got to kind of go inside first, right? And then in parallel, the external, to Alyssa's point, the technology is improving. I think that's coalescing, right? That will help us. SASB, other standards, right? SEC requirements, all that will drive some of the conversation, right? And the maturity of each organization, right? Our suppliers and others, right? As we go forward. But we're not waiting, right? We are at 18%. Now we're at 30%. Our goal is 64% by 2025. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
But to get to 64%, we got to be about 20,000 suppliers, right? For us, that's a big shift from a couple hundred to scale up to 20,000. And we're going through that, to Alyssa's point. Right now, it's a big scale up.
Yeah. And just a call out on that resourcing question as well. I think if I remember rightly, Fred, I mean, Pfizer, when it came to the work we were doing with the Scope 3 benchmark, your way you were structured, where you were trying to embed net zero thinking into procurement, meant you scored pretty down highly on that. I think on that area of engagement of procurement and actually resourcing of Scope 3. So it does feel like, you know, ultimately you can't have a few experts on Scope 3 and equally everyone can't be an expert on it. There needs to be that kind of happy medium of empowering the organisation to learn it and teach itself, which hopefully is where I think the SPP Pharma chapter comes in. Hopefully we're providing that resources for any pharmaceutical procurement professional anywhere to find some like-minded professionals, learn for themselves, not just rely on the training from their company and elsewhere. We know we've got an opportunity to empower ourselves as well, haven't we? I just want to come one final question. I mean, Vincent asks another great question, which is a kind of an obvious elephant in the room, I guess. But how do you help suppliers when some of those companies are just struggling to get the products supplied? So how do we deal with those that perhaps have got what they might say bigger fish to fry? Who wants to pick that one up before we finish?
I think it goes back to segmentation, right? Not to, like, I welcome others, but I think the folks that aren't there, it's difficult to lean in to try to get them there. Because philosophically, if you want to have a discussion with someone, no matter what it is, if they're philosophically not aligned, it's difficult to get them there, right? So we have to continue and incentivize others. But for us, we're going to work with the folks that are philosophically aligned or debating whether they should be philosophically aligned to provide them with the information to be informed, right? So we're going to start in the left-hand side of the bell curve, if you will, the early adopters and the potential adopters to influence the rest of the organization. That's our differentiation piece. So I think it's the opposite of working with the tail, if you will, right? We want to work throughout that, not to say that that's not important, but maybe they do have bigger fish to fry for varying reasons. I'm not going to push that rope. Yeah. We got to go from 30 to 64%. I'm going to get that next segment of suppliers that are near there, ready to be there, right? How do we get them there? And then we'll invest in that remainder, 36% or what have you.
Exactly. Team, I think we'll call it there. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. As good as I hoped. And just again, the collaboration between you as a group has been fantastic. Fred, kudos for pulling that all together. I know you work really hard at it at a time when you're very, very busy. Zelia, you're always brilliant. Alyssa, you're an absolute champion, literally and metaphorically. And Torsten, as I said, your work at Bayer, with obviously inspired by your leadership, is always going to be good. So huge thanks to you all. You are without a doubt one of the best groups that we've got. Another great session. Thank you all. And thank you all for listening in. And stay tuned for a few hours yet. We're not finished. We'll be back soon.
Thank you, Ollie, and thank you to the SVP.